Thanks ever so much for getting back after lunch. We just have me for 2 minutes. It's time for to announce the winner of our student competition. And the student competition is kindly sponsored by FDC. And it's our second year running this. And in terms of it's been something that we've gotten tremendous joy out of, to be honest, because when you talk about, someone mentioned this morning, challenges for the dairy industry involves succession, and succession can look like, we think of it as a family unit, but we can also affect succession at an industry level. And what we want to foster in the Positive Farmers is we want to create that opening, that transfer of knowledge and wisdom, and the amount of knowledge and wisdom and experience in the room here is tremendous. And if we can create any opportunity for young people to access that knowledge, to learn from others, and to make links and connections that's going to help them in their career pathways, well, we really want to facilitate that. So that's how we come up with the idea of the student competition. We had last year's winner, we see down there. We have Matt is down there, and he's been a tremendous force within and learned a lot from taking part last year, and even he was telling me about developing his own discussion group in the last while. So huge positivity there. So again, we had great entries this year, and we have 2 finalists. Joseph Bowen from UCC, and we have Caoimhe McGorman representing DKIT. And after much adjudication, and we had what Michael Murphy described as a tremendous essay that was written. Our winner is UCC's Joseph Bowen. So a big round of applause. So Joseph is going to receive a cheque for €500, and Caoimhe, the runner-up, is going to receive a cheque for €300. And we really hope that that it might be a drop in the ocean when it comes to when it comes to expenses around. But we really want students to put that money towards travelling, learning new skills, getting overseas, and working on other farms if at all possible. So hopefully it'll help in that sense. And if we have Joseph to come up just for his award there, and as well we might have Liam, if you're there, to present it. Liam Hennessy. Oh, there you are. Yeah, brilliant. Big round of applause for Joseph.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Deirdre Hennessy. I am a lecturer in Grassland Science in University College Cork, and I'm going to chair this next session, which is how can we get back to 15 tonnes of dry matter per hectare. So we have two speakers in the session. First, we have Fergal Coughlin. Fergal's farming in Innishannon. He's a graduate of CIT, and I suppose a graduate of Teagasc as well, having spent 14 years working there, including 10 years as farm manager at Clonakilty Agricultural College. And Fergal is going to tell us about his farm, his approach to grassland management, how he's striving to achieve that 15 tonnes grown annually, and how he's looking at optimising the performance on his farm from grass. And our second speaker will be John Marr, and I'll introduce John when it's his turn to stand up here. So Fergal, we'll hand you the floor for now.
Okay, thanks very much, Deirdre. So you'll have an idea about when I go through my slide. Paddy is certainly not my consultant, and I'm not following his rules, but we'll see how we go anyway. So yeah, my talk today is about getting the farm back growing 15 tonne of grass. We have been doing that up to about the last 2 years. We're down to growing around 13 tonne, so we have been growing consistently 15 and 16 tonne for probably the previous 7 or 8 years, but it's dropped in the last 2 or 3. So just a bit about me. So we're farming in Innishannon. It's about 20 minutes south of here by Kinsale. It's really dry, free draining soil, but it's got a brown earth. So when it does rain, it kind of goes off. It evaporates quickly enough, but we don't burn up too easily either in the summer months. So it's a really good soil. We get about 1,400 mil of rain per year. So as Deirdre said, I did a ag science degree, and probably the week I finished that, I was offered a job in Moore Park. So under the advice of my father, he said, geez, go away and get it. So I did. I started working in Teagasc there and I spent 14 years there. Along the way, I suppose I met I worked with good researchers, and I got to travel and worked on really good farms as well. Some of you are down the audience there. So that is, I suppose, just a picture of what we were. So we were sheep and beef farming. That picture is probably 30 plus years old. The main focus on our farm growing up as a child was really around animal husbandry and having healthy soil, having growing a lot of grass, converting it at the time to lamb and beef. So I guess my key lessons learned from my time working off farm for 14 years was, I suppose, the grass targets and how to manage grass at different times of the year, managing people, and I suppose it's about having a good working environment, identifying areas of efficiencies that you can improve on your farm, and I suppose ultimately it's never underestimating the impact of cow welfare and their health on the overall performance of your farm. So while working off farm, I could see that the potential profits were far greater in a dairy enterprise than they were in the sheep and beef farm that we had at home. So in 2016, I went into partnership with my parents, and we converted the family farm at home. So you can see in the top picture there, we had some really muscly limousine bulls, and contrasting then with the young dairy stock that were coming in. The picture of my father there was the first day I brought home probably 270 kilo Jersey heifers, and he was saying, "You're daft," he said. But anyway, we ever since he's looking after the young stock for me, so he's a great addition to the farm. So yeah, we converted the family farm, built a parlour, roadways, fencing, reseeded, water trucks, the whole lot. So we could kind of manage that while working off farm as well. And we started milking with 116 heifers in year one. So currently, so Amy and I have 4 young kids. The oldest is 6 and the youngest is 6 weeks old. So it's a busy house. It can be nice to go down the farm for a break sometimes. So I'm home full-time since 2002, and we employ someone full-time on the farm as well. We're milking about 150 cows. I'm trying to run a system that allows me free time at home to help out at home, but also being profitable. And I enjoy farming, so I have a passion for it, and I like doing things right. So this is our farm. The green block there is the milking platform. It's 39 hectare. Paddy mentioned earlier about getting to 70. If you go under 70% of the land, you have to question the stocking rate. I'm actually at 62% of the land that I own is in the milking platform. Stocking is available for the cows to graze. So overall stocking rate is 2.65. It's all owned land. The calves are reared on the farm on the outside block there, the blue, and the maiden heifers are contract reared off farm. I run a stocking rate of 4 cows to the hectare on the milking platform. I grow high quality grass silage on the outside blocks, and I use that to support the high stocking rate on the milking platform. Because it's so close, there's only about 200 metres of a gap there between our distance, so the slurry is spread evenly across all the farm. So in this talk, I want to talk about how I plan to get back to growing 15 tonne of grass on my farm, and the 15 tonne is a target applicable and achievable for my farm. But for someone else's farm, the target could be 16 tonne, or it might be 9 tonne what's achievable. So you need to understand the figures for your own farm, your soil type, and have realistic targets of what you can grow on your farm. So I'll go through how I manage grass in spring, summer and autumn, a bit about bloat, because we have a lot of clover on our farm, and then just how every year I sit back and I say, right, am I actually doing things right or wrong, or are the choices I'm making on farm improving the genetics of the herd, or am I actually growing more grass? So I have a target of growing 2.5 tonne of grass in the springtime. That's from January to April. So it's roughly an average growth of 21 per day. So that's it's 5 a day for January, 10 for March, or 10 for February, sorry, 20 for March, and I hope to grow 50 for April. They're all achievable targets for my farm. Okay, so at this system, so the non-negotiables from my system at 4 cows per hectare, I know that I have a high demand this spring, so I have a high stocking rate, and we've about 90%, 85 to 90% calving in 6 weeks, so there's a high demand for grass in spring. The opening farm cover has to be 1100, so again there's a trade-off between grass quantity and grass quality. If you go too high of an opening farm cover, you have too many heavy covers and your grass quality will reduce. I know I need high quality feed in terms of silage. That feed has to be 75 DMD plus and 16% protein. I know I'm going to be feeding silage in my system, so it has to be high quality. Feed space per cow, 10 reels at least, because you don't want to be, so I suppose spring is about taking advantage of when they come, that there's a dry patch of a particular paddock and you need 2 wires straight away to set it up. I don't want to be taking down wires somewhere else, just have enough reels on the farm. You can see a few pictures there. It's sure the bottom one there, it was a perfect day, put the cows out, went out to lock them out and it started snowing, so that just happens in spring. Okay, so the spring rotation planner is a tool that I use that I just track to make sure that I'm following my targets area graze each week. So I know I don't want to make silage on my milking platform because all the silage comes from somewhere else. I want to utilise every blade of grass that the cows eat it and turn it into high kilos milk solids. The red line is my target area graze, the green is my actual area graze. So as soon as the weather allows, I'm grazing as much grass as I can. I'm probably racing ahead of my target's area graze, but I don't mind that because the grass that I graze in February is the grass that I'm grazing in the first 15 days of April. So I need that grass grazed in early February to have high quality grass at the start of the second round. And then during periods of wet weather, the cows are staying indoors. So we aim to have about 40% grazed in the 1st of March and 70% grazed by the middle of March, and we're starting the second round 1st of April usually. We'll talk about slurry and fertiliser use there later. So a few simple guides that I follow and that we have it on for everyone involved in the farm at home. You need to walk your paddocks to see are they suitable for grazing. Just because there might have been 15 mil of rain the night before doesn't mean that there's some parts of a paddock that you can't get to. So we try and graze wherever we can, whenever we can. Cows can't be full of silage when they go grazing grass because your utilisation will be so poor. So you might as well just keep them in the shed for an extra 2 or 3 hours until they're hungry and they have an appetite and then leave them out. Grazing in square blocks. So long rectangles, cows will do an awful lot of damage, walk you up and down paddocks. So we try and graze in squares if we can. And it's crucial that we graze to 3.5 centimetres. So we want to remove all that grass that's been growing over the winter months. And you can see in the picture there, we want tillering. We want new shoots growing with no damage done. We achieve that through, I suppose, certain allocations of grass and on-off grazing as well. So how do I know I've done a good job or a poor job? During the spring, it all comes down to the first week of April. So am I on track or not to start the second round? Have I the feed there on the farm? So this cover is that after showing up there? It is. No, it's not. The pointer thing is working. And this cover was done on the 1st or the 5th of April. So I have a farm cover of 630. My growth is only 29. This is from 2024, so it was April was a tough month on the farm at home. Demand is 38 because I'm anticipating the burst of growth. So I'm ready to start the second round. You'll notice there the top 4 paddocks have a cover of around 1200 on them. So my growth overall is 29, but when I look at those top 4 paddocks, they're all growing between 50 and 60. So if I don't start grazing those paddocks in early April, and if they're growing 50 a day, that's 350 in a week. I suddenly have covers of 1700 on the farm in early April or mid-April, and then that's my quality. I'm putting in extra feed where I shouldn't be feeding. So it's just about understanding the targets that you have on the farm. You'll also notice here the milk yield. Yeah, here it's working now. So the milk yield, the cows are doing 26.5 litres of milk at that time, 457 fat and 359 protein. So it was mentioned, and they're doing 2.23 kilos of milk solid. It was mentioned earlier that if you put in silage, then you're going to have reduced milk yields. I'm not seeing that in my case, just because the quality of silage is so good. Okay, summer targets. So I go from measuring grass on an average farm cover basis, and then for the summer months I focus on cover per livestock unit. So this is for the months, so my summer period is May, June and July. Again, so yeah, focusing on cover per livestock unit. I want to maintain that between 150 and 190. I'm measuring grass probably every 5 or 7 days here. Demand is set between 65 and 70, because I don't want to be taking surpluses off the farm, and I don't want to be feeding any excessive concentrate more than what's actually needed on the farm. So I hope to feed maybe 1 kilo or 2 of concentrate just during that period and no silage. Okay, so how do I track again? So the main thing I focus on during those summer months is protein percentage in the milk. It's the key indicator that I'm feeding the cows well, and that they're getting good grass. So you can see it goes from 359 up to just under 4% protein for those months. Again, it's the cheapest milk you're going to produce, because it's virtually all off grazed grass. It's also during the breeding season, so you have to have high quality feed going into the cows. For my autumn budgeting, so I'm targeting 5.7 tonne of grass grown in this period. Again, so they're realistic targets for my farm as well, because the farm should grow roughly 70 in August, 60 in September, 35 in October, and then falling off between 10 and 15 depending on the autumn for the rest of the year. So I could talk about building cover and stuff like that, but John's going to talk about that. So I just want to talk about how I manage clover in the autumn, because I want to maintain the clover that I have on the farm. So what's the right average farm cover for your farm? For my farm, it's reaching a peak of roughly 1,000, and then we track that. We do up a budget, and then we track that cover, and then sell stock or not sell stock depending on the grass target. When I'm closing the paddocks is the one time that I have to focus on the clover. So the low clover content paddocks, they're grazed first in October and they're closed. The highest clover content paddocks are grazed last in November, and we're grazing tight. So my closing farm cover target is about 850. Because I'm budgeting about a 5 or 6 of a growth rate over the winter periods, and then that's opening farm cover around 1100 for my system. You'll see here in the bit of a table, right? So my closing farm cover on the 10th of December was 898 kilos per hectare, right? But if you look at it, it's the low clover content paddocks. So the clover, that's roughly 55% of my farm, that has a clover content between 0 and 15%. That's got the highest cover on it, so it's 1,050. The medium ones has the intermediate cover, and the paddocks that have the really high level of clover have the lowest closing farm cover. Because if you close your high clover content paddocks at a high cover, the research has shown that there's a risk of losing that feed during those months. The next thing is bloat prevention, because I suppose every single discussion group that came to Clonakilty when I was working there, the main topic was how to prevent bloat. From my 14 odd years experience with managing clover, I've 3 simple steps that you just need to follow. So the management of the herd changes. So I have roughly 4 or 5 paddocks that I call high clover content paddocks, similar to Swords where they're in the picture there. So I change the management of those, of how we graze the herd for those months in July, August and September, because that's when the clover content is at its highest in the sward, and then the risk of bloat is at its highest as well. Allocate grass on a 12-hour basis. We let all the herd into the paddock as much as we can, or 70% or whatever. We don't leave off just the first row of cows after milking, because they're going to gorge themselves on the clover then if they have access to the full paddock. So we leave all the herd move at the same time into those 3 or 4 or 4 or 5 paddocks that have a high risk of bloat. We don't use any bloat products or any oils or anything like that. If it's damp, wet weather, we'll probably feed 1 kilo or 2 of dry matter of high quality silage just to slow down the rate of digestion in the rumen, which stops the causing of bloat. Okay, so every year then I do a review. So as I said earlier, how do I know that I'm actually improving the farm system? Am I making more money? Where am I losing it? How do I improve in terms of grass growth? I'll first start with animal performance. So this is just a summary of the performance since we started milking in 2017. So year one, as I said, in 2016, we bought 116 maiden heifers in March and April. Thankfully, they all went in calf in year one. They all calved down fine again, did 375 kilos of milk solids in year one. Again, 0% empty after 12% or after 12 weeks breeding. So then that meant that I had all second calvers going in. I didn't need to buy any stock for that year. Again, 3% empty after year two, and you can just see the empty rates have remained consistently low, under roughly, sure, I don't know what the average is, probably around 4 or 5% there. This year empty rates have risen a bit, but I have reduced my breeding season from 12 weeks to 9 weeks. The next thing I want to talk about is just so am I picking the right bulls to improve my price, my value of every kilo of milk solids that I sell out the gate? So my annual percentage of protein has increased from 3.7 up to 3.88 this year. So it probably just proves that the bulls I'm picking are actually performing on the ground and they're achieving what I want to achieve. And again, you can see the fat is also rising as well, while the cows are consistently performing close over, whatever, 470 to 520 odd kilos of milk solids per year. So I'm getting about 6 cents a litre more than the average person in Bandon Co-op. So if I calculate that figure off my volume milk sold, the better genetics in my herd and how I manage grass is worth €50,000 to me per year. If I go back to analysing how the grass grows on each farm and each paddock, I don't look at it just on a per farm basis. I look at it on a per paddock basis. So the top paddock is growing 15 tonne plus, but my worst 3 or 4 paddocks they're only growing 11 tonne. So there's 4.5 tonne of a difference between the paddocks. On average, we're growing 13 tonne. Usually we're growing close to 15. So assuming the figure from Teagasc is correct, that every tonne of grass utilised is worth €225 more profit to me, then that's €1,000 of a hectare between the top and the worst paddock in terms of monetary value. So the cost of reseeding that paddock, if I get that back up growing 15 tonne, the cost of that is covered within 1 year. I spoke about the targets earlier, and I have different targets for each third of the year, you could say. So my target is 2.5 tonne in spring. So this is 2024 data. I grew 2.3 tonne. In the summer months, you can see I'm 1.3 tonne behind. And in the autumn, I'm nearly making my target grass growth as well. So the big reduction is coming in the summer months. Again, if I can grow that grass, if I can increase that across the farm, it's worth 28,000 to me. Next, if I break it down in between the clover content, we mentioned earlier how I close the paddocks according to the clover content on the farm. If I look at the grass growth according to the clover content, my lowest clover content paddocks in 2024 only grew 12.4 tonne of grass. The medium ones, which have a clover content between 16 and 25, grew 13.3, so 900 kilos more per paddock or per hectare, whereas the high clover content paddocks grew 13.8 tonne of grass in 2024. If I look at it on a per nitrogen applied then, you can see my lowest clover content paddocks have the most nitrogen applied but are growing the least amount of grass, whereas the paddocks that have the optimum level of clover are only getting roughly 170 kilos of nitrogen but growing 13.5 tonne of grass. And that was in a year that was supposedly poor for clover growth. If I take a step back and if I look at what are the controllable factors on the farm that I can impact grass growth, some factors are outside our control and there's nothing we can do about it. If it doesn't rain, we can't make the grass grow. If we're on a really heavy soil, you can't do anything about it unless you sell it and buy a dry farm. Or if you're on a dry farm, you also have negative impacts of summer droughts. Soil temperature, we can't make the sunshine in April to get grass growing. So during periods, I think it was in 3 or 4 years ago, I was grazing covers of 400. There's nothing you can do about it, you just have to buy the feed and suffer on. Whereas if we look at the factors within our control, So there's a lot more factors here that we can control that impact grass growth. And I guess if all of these are correct, then there's nothing else you can do to impact the grass growth. So soil fertility, 77% of the soil on my farm is at optimum for pH, P and K. I think there's only about, P is the only limiting factor. I think it's 23% of the farm is at index 2 for P. So that's why not all the soil is at optimum. But so you've other targets. You've like your grazing management. Are you going to wrecking the place in February? That's going to impact your grass growth. Have you the right grazing infrastructure? Have you multiple access points? Have you a roadway system set up properly? Is your soil fertility right? Is your nitrogen? If you're spreading no nitrogen, then you're obviously going to grow less grass. If you're spreading more nitrogen, that point doesn't materialise now because the clover is growing more nitrogen on my farm. But I know you get the idea. The slurry management I've approached of applying little and often slurry rather than dumping 3,000 gallons on a paddock of thick slurry. We dilute the slurry at home. We put the rainwater into the tanks to dilute it. We prefer to spread at lower rates of slurry, like 1,600 gallons per acre, but do it probably 4 or 5 times in the year to get better use of that slurry. Paddy mentioned some outside blocks and just renting land as well, and so we rent about 3 or 4 hectares, just a kilometre over the road. It was offered to us, so we said we'd take it. So we planted red clover in it. It's in year 2. It's growing 16.5 tonne of grass for me. And again, it's contributing to my high quality feed that I need for my system. You can see what's applied to it there. There is some nitrogen applied. Soil index are 1 and 1 and for P and K on that piece of land. So we are putting in a bit of nitrogen as well. So yeah, it's cut 3 times and then we graze it in mid-December with dry cows. Okay, so after all of that, what am I going to be doing after hearing today about stocking rate and the impact on stocking rate on the farm? What am I doing to potentially improve the farm for next year? So I'm probably going to reduce stocking rate slightly because I'm not getting the chance to reseed paddocks in the summer months because grass growth isn't matching my demand, so I don't have the opportunity to take out paddocks for reseeding. And the value of reseeding is going to be paid off in year 1. I'll probably reseed more of my own block with red clover, return to allocating grass on a 36-hour basis because cows produce more milk when allocated grass on a 36-hour basis rather than they do on a 12-hour basis. I'll seek new opportunities. I'm lucky at home there's somebody really good employed with me, but and I suppose it's just the attention to detail that we run at home. Everything is hopefully spot on, but I'm not sure how repeatable that is on another farm. So I think if we scale back a bit, it'd be easier to replicate the farming system that we're trying to do on potentially another farm. Also want to continue learning and go to conferences like this. Also really enjoy helping new entrants and just general good debate between the 2 discussion groups that I'm in. The Dairy Miss group and the Band and Budget group. I really enjoy going to those meetings. Some members are in the audience there, so there's always good debate and there's no holding back, so I enjoy that. And I just want to thank you for your time there, and that's my story for the last couple of years.
Thanks, Fergal. We'll hold the questions until John has given us his presentation. So our next speaker is John Marr, based at Teagasc Moor Park out in Cork, outside Cork City. He's the manager of the Grass 10 programme, and the aim of that programme is to increase the level of pasture utilised on farms and achieve 10 grazings per year to enhance that utilisation. Previously, John worked in research before becoming a dairy specialist, and most of his work throughout his career has focused on grazing management. So John is going to talk to us about how we can get back to that 15 tonnes of dry matter per hectare.
Okay, thanks, Chairperson. I suppose before I begin, I would like to acknowledge my co-authors here today, if that's all right. Joseph Dunphy, who's here and works here today and is part of the Grass 10 team, and Kieran Hearn, who's part of Pasture Base Ireland. And I suppose you see the two logos on the screen. We obviously work on Grass 10, but you know what I'm about to present today, a lot of the information comes from the farmers, and that goes into the Pasture Base database, which is a grassland database going, right now, 12, 13 years. Right, so, you know, I have to acknowledge the farmers who put that information in, and a lot of the information I'm going to refer to today comes from your data, and some of the farmers that contribute to that database are here today, and I just want to acknowledge that. It's a massive asset to have, that we have a database on all things grassland and grazing. So the question that was posed to us by the Positive Farmers Committee, I suppose, was to how we can get back to 15 tonnes of dry matter per hectare, and then they threw in a few other additions as well. Look at the level of pasture production, to review nitrogen use, right, in its entirety. The impact, you know, of where we are with pasture production on the feed system, the role of clover, Fergal has alluded to that, and to look at what the best farmers are doing. So there was a lot in it, if that's all right. So I hope the chairperson will give me enough time to do all this. Yeah. Anyway, we'll move on. All right. So I suppose before we begin, maybe we need to take a step back as to why we're chasing pasture production, right? And look, some of this has been covered this morning, so I won't dwell on it too long. Only to say that when you look at the factors that influence net profit, and there's many examined, and look, Mike made reference to some of them this morning, whether it's milk yield or other factors, you know, performance per cow, all that kind of things. But the one that stands out like a sore thumb and accounts for most of the factor influencing net profit, and there are a few, but this is the biggest by far, is the level of grass utilised. And what you see there is a lot of records carried out this analysis a number of years ago, but over a period of 7-8 years. So the relationship is very, very strong, and it has a huge factor. So simply put, the more grass the animals can eat, the more profit we can make, right? And we wouldn't want to forget that, I suppose. That's the point, I suppose, we're going to move on to. So what does that mean then? Fergal, in his presentation, used a figure of €225 per tonne of grass utilised. I think that's probably pretty close for the year 2024, thereabouts. Right, this data here in front of you averaged about 170, 180 over a number of years. Is somewhat linked to milk price, I don't deny that. But look, a conservative figure for every additional tonne of grass utilised, or every increase, right, to a 80 hectare farm is worth somewhere about 14 or 15,000. If I use Fergal's figures, it'll be a lot closer to 20. So there's a lot of money to be played for, right? And it has a massive impact on the system and the profitability of the system, which have been touched on this morning. So we'll move on. Right. So some of the things we're asked to look at is where things have been, levels of pasture production, impact on the system, and some of this has been referred to Mike and other speakers this morning. So I won't dwell too long on it. I'll just make 4 points. It's a busy slide, but I'll just make 4 points very, very quickly. Right, we'll start with the green bars versus the blue bars. Right, so a picture tells 1,000 words. It's very, very simple. The blue bars are about 10 years ago. The green bars are more recent. And the first two here are either grazed grass or grass clover swards. And you can see that even Paddy mentioned this morning somewhere about the cost of grass around 11 cents. Right, so I'll use probably 10, but we won't argue it's around that. But you can see the others here, like silage and concentrate, and I suppose especially silage, with all the levels of increase and inflation in costs, you know, these have become more expensive over time. So we have got to get back to doing a better job at grazing and pasture production. And that's what I'm simply saying. But the national stats, so I'm going to use different stats today and I'll call them out as I go. Sometimes it'll be pasture based, which, you know, in this case is going to be the top 1,000 farmers or thereabouts. This is national statistics from Ireland. So, and what's happened over time here is that, you know, people referred to it this morning as replacing grass with meal or other or purchased feeds, or you can call it system drift, which, you know, Lawrence has mentioned here 2 years ago. But like we have, you know, increased the level of concentrate feeding over the last number of years. So we've gone from almost a tonne to a tonne and a quarter. The figures are out for 2024, but it's going to be close to a tonne and a half. right, of imported feed, largely in the form of concentrate. So you look at the figures here. There we are, 1,000. This is 1,250. That's going to be way higher now, I'm afraid. When you look then at look at some of the figures here and look at the level of milk solids production per kilo of meal fed, right? I have to thank Michael Donovan for this slide now, but you can see here like the efficiency factors, and you can see here in 2018 when we had low levels of pasture production. And look at the amount of concentrate that went in, you can see that we're only doing about 0.3 kilos of milk solids per kilo of meal fed. We've been above 0.4 in the past. We're 0.35 for 2022. I'm afraid we're going to be closer to 0.3, and I hope not less than 0.3 in 2024. So, this is of concern now, right? At the same time, the level of stocking rate is increasing on the platform, and then you look at the level of grass production here at the bottom of the slide, and you see that there's almost a 2-ton difference between the good years and the bad years. Okay, so we just need to keep that in mind. That if we don't get the sums right, the figures right in terms of how to stock the farm and the level of pasture production that relates to the stocking of the farm, if we don't get that right, then there are consequences. And it fundamentally means, when you look at the first slide, a reduction in profit. Right. Okay. Now back to the best farmers who, put in their records and grazing measurements into PastureBase and the database. So what you have here in front of you is what we call the benchmark farms in PastureBase. There's somewhere about 900 to 1,000 farmers in that. Again, it's analysis that Michael Donovan and his team have carried out over time in the Grassland Science Department in Moorepark. But look, very, very quickly, where are we at broadly now? I'll come back to this a little bit more detail in a minute. But if you take at 14.5 tonnes or higher, right, over the last number of years, you have somewhere about 7% of farmers achieving that, right? It's less than 5% for over 15 tonnes, right? I suppose if you go down to the bottom here, we have over 50% of the top around 50% of the top farmers producing less than 12.5 tonnes of pasture production per hectare, okay, over the last number of years. I suppose the other relationship that's obvious here is as we increase the level of pasture production, the level of, or the number of grazings increases. Okay, you see that we go from about 7 almost to 9. Okay, so the Grass 10 campaign is called Grass 10 for a few reasons, but one of them is to try and achieve 10 grazings per paddock per year, right? And you can see that what that can do for the level of pasture production on the farm. Right, I should also say, sorry, and Joe will give out to me now. Right. Geographic location is not a factor in this, right? So in that top 5%, there are farmers from the northwest, southwest, southeast, northeast. Okay. Some people will argue about geographic location, but not in this case. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Right, we'll move on. Okay, again back to, I suppose, Brendan Horn and Joe. They have carried out a kind of a little analysis on the adoption of the key practices that brings success to grazing and grazing management. Okay, and there are a few, and I'm going to go through this in a little bit more detail as we go on. The presentation will get more detail, but look, they revolve around grazing infrastructure, clover-based systems, soil fertility, which is basic but still remains a challenge, grassland measurement, right? The tools then that are available, either to yourself or through PastureBase or other systems, which are the feed budget, spring rotation plan, and then the recording of fertilizers and manures on PastureBase, because you're basically then tracking the level of nutrient requirement and the nutrient used to get the level of pasture production that you're chasing. So, but if you see in the blue boxes very, very quickly, like it's all small percentages, So less than 5% of farms have enough clover at this stage. If you take it in terms of soil fertility, the national stats will say we only have 25% of the soils that are adequate for, on dairy farms now, for P, K and lime. That's a stretch, I'll explain that in a minute. The level of measurement, to do 30 measurements in the year, Fergal's outlined what he does. He's part of this, you'll understand that. Then that to get the best out of pasture production, the measurement piece is key. There's a regulatory limit for those in derogation of 20. I would argue that's not enough. It has to be 30 or more. So, and you look at then at the tools and the recordings, and they're low as well. So if you want to get the most out of the farm in terms of pasture production, there are tools available, but there are also things or key management practices to help you achieve the level of potential from the farm. But they have to be adopted. And you can see here that for many, the level of adoption is not there. And, it's going to then create limitations in terms of pasture production. Right, so we'll go through some of these in a little bit more detail. I'm going to go back to 10 years ago when Stan Lawler presented this conference, because we were just after the exit of the quota system. We were, I suppose, limiting in terms of lime, P and K on many farms. Unfortunately, that trend is, while it has got better, it's a long way off from where we need to be, a long way off. And if you just took the three together very, very quickly, just doing basic sums here now, every 3 tons of grass matter per hectare is worth 400 or 500 euros per hectare, just because you fix the lime, fix the P, fix the K. Now, lime, P and K have a massive bearing on nitrogen use efficiency as well, which is not built into this. Lime being the most important, because P and K, you can apply them, but if the lime status is poor, the P and K get locked up, particularly the P. So the nitrogen use efficiency is something that we have to be more conscious of for many, many reasons. There's a cost focus, there's an environmental focus, but then more importantly, that as for today's presentation, there's a pasture production focus on that as well. And we can't afford to lose it. There is pathways that nitrogen can be easily lost. It's, P and K are kind of what we call solid materials. Nitrogen is a different material altogether as an element. It's broadly a gas, but it can work its way into water. It works its way into air. It can be taken from the air. So there are many pathways, and we have to try and get the best out of it in the system. But lime is the cornerstone. But when we have, and people asked a question this morning about fertilizer limits or nitrogen fertilizer limits going forward. Yeah, they're going to come, and they have been coming, and more will come. So we need to hold on to every piece we can, or trap every piece we can. Soil fertility is the first basic step of that, right? So, if you take even the most simple pathways, if we're deficient in lime, right, and our soils are too acidic, we will lose nitrogen to the air, never to return, right? If we apply P and where our soils are acidic, okay, the P is locked up, not lost, but locked up. But nitrogen's a different story. If we're wrong, it's lost, and it's lost in many ways. But we can't afford to be losing it, because it is going to be, in terms of trying to achieve 15 tons of or 14 or 15 tons of pasture production per hectare, we can't afford to have those losses. So where are we nationally? Hot off the press, I suppose, in the last 2 days. But anyway, in fairness to some of our colleagues in Teagasc, they put this together. This is dairy only, 2024 stats. Where are we? So I know there's some visitors here today. Don't worry about the indexes, but look very, very quickly. That's just our system of doing it here. But very, very quickly, the percentage of soil samples on target, right? And I know there's different ways of measuring P and K, but just if we stick to I suppose these boxes here, we have very, very quickly about 60% of the soils on dairy farms are adequate for P, 62 for K, and 61% for lime. Now, I've picked lime at 6.2 or pH at 6.2, right? If we're talking clover, that has to be 6.5. If I went back last year, these figures would be closer to 50%. If I do 6.5, this figure will be closer to 50%. So while there is progress, and there has been some, we're still a nice bit short now, to be honest. I suppose of greater concern to people like myself standing here today talking about this is that when you look at it, right, there is no limitations on the application of K. There are no limitations, regulatory limitations on the application of lime, yet we're short of lime and short of K. So I admit there are limits in terms of P allowance and nitrogen allowance, but not in terms of K or lime. And they influence the amount of nitrogen available to the plant. So if they're short, then the plant is compromised in terms of its potential. And I say a plant, that's both the clover plant and the ryegrass plant. I should also say at this stage, I suppose, just to be clear about it, if we're short of P or K, I'll just pick those two very, very quickly. The ryegrass plant will underperform, but probably survive. If we're short of P or K of lime, the clover plant will certainly underperform and probably won't survive. They're two different plants and we need both. So just to say that. Right, what's happened then in terms of P and K and lime sales in 2024 versus the target? The target here is set out by what's called the MAC curve. And that's just what that means is the marginal abatement cost curve. And it's what that curve aims to do, and it's because of our environmental regulation that we need this and we're trying to work on it. But it simply identifies the, I suppose, key options or limits that we need to get to our greenhouse gas emission targets, right? So just simply put, like if we're going to reach our greenhouse gas emission targets by 2030, we need to spread, roughly speaking, 46,000 tonnes of P every year to get to there. 120,000 tonnes of K and 2.5 million tonnes of lime. So you can see that in terms of P, we're only 2/3 of the way. In terms of K, we're 3/4 of the way. Now, we were on target, a few years ago for both P and K. Unfortunately, the cheapest one of all and the one with the most influence is lime. We need 2.5 million tonnes a year. We're spreading somewhere about 1 million, sometimes 1 million and a bit. But the last time we were over 2 million tonnes was pre-quotas. That's over 40 years ago, right? And like lime is the cheapest form of nitrogen, Ps or Ks you could nearly get because it unlocks it from the soil. So we have a long way to go yet. Now, I'm probably preaching to the converted here today that, a lot of people have the soil fertility right, but Fergal's made reference to it and he's right. We can't grow, the levels of pasture production we want unless we have these things right. And I suppose we just need to keep that in mind. Right, we'll move on. So, some of these subjects have been touched on this morning, so I won't dwell too long on them, and Fergal's made reference to as well. Grazing infrastructure, if we want to, one thing is growing the grass, the other challenge is to utilise it. So grazing infrastructure doesn't cost an arm and a leg. It's a very high, quick return on investment, enables grazing or access to pasture. If we go back to previous speakers at this conference over the years, and from one of the first times I ever start doing this job, like when the animals are out grazing, they're feeding themselves, they're spreading their own slurry. When they're inside, then you're feeding them and, you're spreading the slurry. So we would want to forget. But 2024, I suppose, the first half of the year, for people like me who go out and meet groups and do training courses on grazing and all that, I suppose some of the inadequacies were highlighted in early 2024 in terms of not having good enough infrastructure on the farm. Yeah, we generally find around the main part of the farmyard and the major part of the milking platform, it's fine. But then as you move through the grazing rotation and get further and further away, these things become more apparent in terms of, inadequate roadways, access, water trucks. As a result, then there's less grazing practiced. Land gets damaged because access is poor or the paddocks are not structured right, and the result of this is poor sward quality, which other speakers have alluded to today already. So, if you don't graze and reach your targets, there's consequences in quality during the year, and if you damage the land, there's consequences in quality as well. There are ways around that. Fergal put up his own story on grazing infrastructure. You can improvise with, this is a farm below in Kerry. And they are what I call the king of farmers in the country doing spur roadways. They're small, narrow roadways that enable access to pasture where either the paddock is difficult or whether the weather is difficult. But enable grass get into the diet of the animal, which is what we're fundamentally about. That's a constructed one, and this is an improvised one, but they can be done. I suppose that's the point I'm making to you. To move on, reseeding. Fergal's alluded to this. Some of the points on the board here in front of you, Fergal has touched on. I won't dwell on them too long. It offers a massive opportunity, though, to bring new grass into the farm. It's and clover. It is an area of huge return. and I think Fergus alluded to that as well. The pasture profit index is there now. It's gone for a number of years. It evaluates grass varieties under grazing, not under cutting regimes. And to me, in 2024, when you're walking farms and they're under pressure with weather conditions and grass growth and pasture growth, well, when you go to the paddocks that are freshly reseeded, they perform, right? They deliver. So, unfortunately, a lot of reseeding got postponed in 2024. That needs to be readdressed. There are challenges around that. Fergus touched on one in stocking rate. I'll move on. If your stocking rate is high, it gets harder to do that on the platform. Over the years, I would say our level of establishment hasn't improved, and we have to revisit this, and this is part of our job on Grass 10 as well, particularly in terms of clover. You get a new reseed in, clover should be coming up, and it doesn't. In many cases, it's either poor technique or the seed is buried too deep. Clover does not have the ability to come from depth. Once you go below 1 centimetre, I think you're in trouble. So the timing, spring is always better than autumn. I've a lot of people postponed reseeding for last spring for, either they were short of feed, short of grass. I can understand that. Some reseeding took place in the autumn. Unfortunately for people like me who walk these, then very little clover there. So the spring is much better than the autumn, and there's been a lot of research done on that. And then there is issues around herbicide management as well. So there's a bit of work to be done on that, and that's something we plan to focus on this spring ourselves. Right, we need to understand a little bit about the plant before I move on. Some of the basics, and some of this has been touched on, but I won't spend long on it now. But look, we need to remind ourselves how this plant grows and get the best out of it. And the DAT and pasture base then will support some of the arguments I'm going to make here. But very, very quickly, if I talk about the main part of the grazing season, not early on now, right? The sward needs to be leaf from head to toe, from top to bottom. If we bring in stem or dead material, the animal underperforms, the sward is undergrazed, we grow less, the animal performs poorer, we grow less grass, we grow less herbage. So, this has to be got right, and it's a balancing act. You can go too early, you can go too late. And the main place to be is between the second and third leaf appearance stage. So a leaf appears every 7 days. You've all heard this before, and it goes back to work done in the 1960s by some famous researchers from Ireland and New Zealand. But, the rules haven't changed, but you need to land in the paddock at the right time. Otherwise, there's consequences. And I suppose, to get the best out of it then, to be honest, the sward has to be cleaned off well, and that's a major problem for the last number of years. That people like me who do this job, to get farmers to graze to 4 centimetres. And I picked 4 now because of the main grazing season. Mike alluded to 3 centimetres this morning in the first round, no argument to that. Fergus talked about 3.5 centimetres in the second round, and no argument with that, because it's easier to do that. But getting this right in the first 2 grazing rotations is critical, and that's before the 1st of May. So just to remind ourselves, right? So if we get to the 4th leaf, which is on the right-hand side of your screen there, right? The problem being is the first leaf starts to die, more stem comes in, the animal finds it hard to graze, stem doesn't grow grass, leaf grows grass, dead material doesn't grow grass. So we just got to remember that. So you have to arrive at the right stage. If you go too early, you're burning reserves out of the plant and out of the soil, and you don't grow as much. So just to remind ourselves, the first leaf does about 20% of the dry matter production, the second leaf does about 30%, and the last leaf does about 50%. So you have to arrive at the right stage here. And if unfortunately sometimes happens, if you run the farm cover too low, which I'm going to come to and Fergus alluded to, you will grow less. So it's a balancing act. And the way to get around that then is to make sure that you maximise leaf on the farm, right, at all stages. Leaf is what grows, the rest don't, right? There's 3 components to the grass plant: leaf, stem, and dead material, okay? And leaf is where the growth is. And we have to get that right. And in order to keep it right, you have to graze to 4 centimetres. So if there's 2 major failings that people like myself and my colleagues see in terms of grazing management during the season, I suppose, is that not everybody will graze to 4 centimetres. There are a number of reasons for that. Sometimes, in many cases, is because they're going into the wrong grass. They're too late. And on average, that's about 2 or 3 days. So, you know, people like me will talk about grazing 1400, but when you look at the pasture-based data, for last number of years, when you get to the mid-season and when everything is supposed to be going according to plan, you know, growth rates of 60 to 70 kilos a day, unfortunately, the pre-grazing yields are closer to 16 or 1700. When that happens, then you're into the fourth leaf, and I needn't say any more. For 400 or 500 euros, I wouldn't be sure of the price, but right, it would measure the post-grazing height for you. Right? Like, you know, everybody will tell you they're grazing to 4 centimetres. Any surveys we've done on this by either myself or other colleagues of ours in Moorpark or other advisors, is seldom we reach that grazing height. It's always higher, right? And mainly because there's stem there. So it's a simple tool. It's made easier though to achieve that target. If you enter the grass at the right stage, it's much easier to achieve the right residual, okay? So, you know, it has to be a focus from the word go. It's not something for the start of the season or the end of the season, it's all season. And one of the easiest way to try and achieve it then is to do the grassland measurements and get the balance right. Fergus done a good job of explaining it. I'm not going to go into it in detail, only to say to you that when we've reviewed this, so recently Michael O'Donovan published a paper on this and delivered at a conference looking at the different grazing targets and where we're at. And we've, you know, over the last number of years, I suppose stretching about the last 10 years, when you looked at the pasture-based data and these 900,000 farms, we see a big improvement in reaching the target opening cover, and Fergus done a good job of explaining it, so I'm not going to spend too long on it. The second rotation, again, Fergus done a good job of explaining it and the numbers there. So the second rotation over time has come that bit earlier, which is desirable because often in the past it was finished too late, and that brings all the challenges with sward quality. I would say at times that while people have started for second rotation on time, the level of farm cover has been below 500, you know. And I've just, without getting into detail about it, if you go below 500 on average farm cover, the leaf content on the farm is compromised, is too low. And you go back to how the plant grows. I said first leaf 20%, second leaf 30%, last leaf 50%. So if you have a low leaf content, which comes about with low farm cover, you will grow less. So it's about getting those targets right. I've mentioned the mid-season, and I'm not going to go back on it. We're just two or three days too late. That's what the pasture-based data shows, and that has consequences then in graze out, getting the right residuals, sward quality, grass growth. I can keep going. The other one that really bugs us, I suppose, in the Grass 10 team is reaching the right targets in the autumn in terms of target farm cover. Fergus outlined his figure, wouldn't disagree, and but unfortunately, if you don't reach it, now people will argue with me quite rightly that they got away with it in 24, but on average, you'll end up growing less grass, and that can go either way. I admit that. But most certainly you will end up filling in the diet of the cow with purchased feeds. I'm not going to dwell on this. Fergus done a good job of explaining it. All we want is to walk the farm and do a cover assessment. It can be plate meter, it can be eyeball, it can be your fists, it can be cut and weigh. We don't mind once we walk and assess the farm in terms of grass supply. And I'd also like to assess it in terms of where we are with quality, which is just simply put the proportion of leaf. Fergus outlined these measurements. I'm not going to dwell on these. Some people like average farm cover, some people like the pasture wedge. We relate to all of them. They all have their uses, they all have their advantages, they all have their preferences. However, I'm going to draw you to the bottom one, which is the first thing that someone like me will do when I see, the pasture wedge or the figures. Are we going into the right grass, which is 13 or 1400 kilograms, which corresponds to the 2.5, 2 3/4 leaf stage of the ryegrass plant. That's what we're after. And if you're not hitting the targets, then we have to adjust. Right? So a lot of people do the walking, do the measurements, but don't use the target. Don't use the targets. Don't adjust. So that involves decision making. Famous expression of this conference years ago: the more I walk, the luckier I get. Right. If we go back to how grass measurement started, I just said I put it in. It started a number of years ago in New Zealand, back in the 1980s, if I'm correct, by a man called Arnold Bryant. And he used a black box, put it in a number of paddocks around the farm. That's how it started, and measuring the height of the grass against the black box. If some of you are old enough to remember the 1980s, there was a lot of plane crashes, and every time the plane crashed, we have to find the black box to find out what went wrong. Same story. Right, nutrient requirements, we're asked to address this as well. So, the nutrient requirement to grow 14 or 15 tonnes of dry matter per hectare, which was outlined 10 years ago by Stan, in fairness, was 250 kilograms of nitrogen, 20 kilos of P, 40 kilos of K, and 20 kilos of sulphur. They're the numbers for grazing. If you bring silage into this changes. But we're grazing today, so that's what we'll stay focused on. If we look what the farmers are doing over the last number of years in pasture-based then, who've recorded this information, recorded well, you'll see that the total nitrogen applied is 236. Now, if I go back 4 years ago, that was over 260. If I go back to more recent times, it's closer to 200. The average is 236. 30 of P, 123 of K, and 21 of sulphur. Now, that nutrient applied comes in the form of slurry and fertiliser largely, right? The figure in the brackets, the 212, the 18, the 48, the 19, that's the fertiliser figure, kilos per hectare. So you can see there that in terms of the figures of P, K, sulphur, all the best farmers are on the money or have surplus, which is good, right? But the nitrogen figure is on the tighter side. And I suppose the allowances going forward are going to get tighter. It was 212 there. That's probably our expectation for 2025. However, there's a new government who formed. 3 government departments had to come together to make a decision on that. We'll know soon. If we look at, this was touched on this morning, I won't dwell on it too long, 2.5 cows per hectare, 250 kilos of nitrogen required to keep that stocking rate going. So, right? But when chemical fertiliser, nitrogen fertiliser is reduced or regulation comes in that we end up with lower allowances, it'll depend a little bit on, stocking rate and things like that as well, but very, very quickly, unfortunately, you bring more risk into the system. And I suppose the feed generation of the farm is compromised and you run the risk of not being self-sufficient, and then what happens is you import more feed. So to maintain pasture production going forward in an environment that we're going to have reduced chemical fertiliser application, we're going to have to be more considerate to things like soil fertility, slurry, which was mentioned this morning, and white clover. All right? But I have to say, if I was to summarise this slide, very, very quickly, when we move to moderate nitrogen input systems, the risk is greater. The risk of feed generation, of getting it right, getting it wrong, is greater. It's something that we do some work with French researchers, and they tell us that we're, not cognizant enough of that at all. So, where does nitrogen come from in our systems? Very, very quickly, right? We have fertiliser, meal or concentrate. The cow does a bit of recycling. Not going to focus on that. Slurry, The soil, which is the unheralded big supplier of nitrogen that people don't realise, and clover. Very, very quickly, they come in the gate, feed and fertiliser. The Clover 150 study is another programme that Grass 10 works with a bit, but very, very quickly, about 50 to 55 kilos of nitrogen comes in the gate in the form of purchased feed at the moment in that study. And these are all farmers who are doing a good job of clover and growing lots of grass. So, that's of concern. When it brings nitrogen in, there is regulatory limits either on fertiliser or about to come on the amount of nitrogen coming in the gate down the road. The soil, if you take Moore Park soil, which is a few miles up the road around here, somewhere just shy of 200 kilos of nitrogen per hectare. It will not deliver that, though, unless the soil fertility is right, lime, P, K, sulphur, right? Clover has potential as well, which we're going to go through very, very quickly. To manage the fertiliser, we need to know what we need to produce and we need to record it. And you have to get that sum right. Otherwise, there's going to be additional costs in the system, which other speakers have alluded to. Very quickly, if you want to grow 15 tonnes of grass or pasture, someone mentioned Mike Deneen here earlier on today. He's done a number of surveys on farm by month, looking at the protein content of the grass, 19%. I won't spend long on the chemistry here, but 19% crude proteins, around 3% nitrogen. That means to grow 15 tonnes of pasture, we need 450 kilos of nitrogen per hectare in total. We've no hope achieving that if the soil fertility is not right, because the soil won't release it. So if you take if you want 450, more park soil supplies 185. I must say to you, in 2024, it was closer to 140, 150 because of a difficult year. So it can vary. It's not, guaranteed every year. We need 265 then, if we take the 185 from 450. If we take what happens in pasture base and what you put in, there's about 25 kilograms of nitrogen coming from slurry collecting yard, right? That means then to balance the books, we need somewhere about 240, 250 kilograms of nitrogen. If the fertilizer allowance for the year ahead at the maximum rate that we think most likely, and that's not announced yet, it's 212, therefore we're short about 30 kilos. So one of the questions posed in the presentation about has clover a role to play, I don't think it was ever a question in the first place. It is part of our system, whether we like it or not, right? And it has the potential to release 80 to 100 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare. I admit in 2024 it was about probably half that. Look at the figures. We'd also would not forget that clover is of benefit to the diet of the animal, and we also know that the greenhouse gas emissions are lower from clover as well. So the animal performs better because the diet is superior, right? It is a different plant. So I've redone the sum, put the clover in, and then the at 80 kilos release of nitrogen from the clover plant, and you have to understand how that works. And I'm saying that 50% of the farm has had with clover, therefore we're getting a 40 kilos across the whole farm in clover, therefore the fertilizer required is somewhere about 200 kilos. So we need to understand these sums. I suppose we also need to understand that fertilizer is loaded more in the spring for reasons. It's loaded more, the slurries probably target more in the spring for those reasons as well. The soil releases more nitrogen as the soil warms up and we go through the season, and it's the same with the clover plant. I know, Chairperson, you're getting anxious on me. Last piece. It's called Grass 10 because we're trying to achieve 10 grazings. This is one of the things that sometimes we produce for farmers. It's called the grazing board. It just records the date when you graze the paddock. You can see here that, if you take line 1, I'll just call it out to you, 21st of March, 7th of May, 25th of May, 10th of June, 25th of June, 26th of August, 19th of August. Every time you get to that paddock, you record the date. And you're able to see at the end of the year where you're at. Very, very useful in the farm office for employed staff or in the dairy. Pasture Base does this as well, but you have to go look for it, in terms of producing the reports. But it is there. But it's very, very handy in the farm office. The science, the maths, very, very quickly. Must thank Kieran Hearn for this from Pasture Base. Thousands upon thousands of records here. Very simply put, it relates the number of grazings to the level of pasture production. If I take the number 10 here, very quickly, go up along there, we're somewhere close to 14, 15 tonnes. Okay, so the more grazings per paddock we achieve in the year, the more grass or pasture we'll produce. That's a summary of that analysis. I think there's 65,000 records or something around that, inside in that, right, from Pasture Base. 7 grazings, 10 tonne, 10 grazings, 14 tonne, 9 grazings, 13 tonne, 11 grazings, 15 tonne. That's why we chase it. How do we make that work in practice? Just a date calendar for you. It's in the paper, be on the website, I suppose, but very, very quickly, right, the first rotation between February 1st, April 6th, Fergal was April 5th, won't argue over a few days. April 7th to April 30th is the next rotation. So there's 2 grazing rotations to achieve by the 1st of May. There are then where the game is largely, not completely, won and lost. May, June, July, August. 4 months, 120 days, 6 grazing rotations. 6 grazing rotations. That's where most fall down. 2 rotations then at the end of the year, from the 1st September to the last rotation of closing. And that'll bring you close to 14, 15 tonnes. Okay. Right. In summary. Sorry, you want to give out to me, are you? Right. Pasture production begins below the surface. Soil fertility. The farmer capability and the attitude is key to using the tools available to try and reach these kind of targets. I can't stress enough that the future systems that we're going to put in place of, feed generation on the farm, they're going to be moderate input. They're going to involve better use of slurry, maximising soil fertility to get the best out of fertiliser, getting the best out of clover, getting the best out of the soil. And weather and things like that can bring variation. So there is greater risk. Our French colleagues warn this of us all the time, and I can't stress that enough. The pasture growing capability of the farm and the farmer must be known. What we're basically referring to there is, you've heard it all this morning about the stocking rate. If we have so many cows and we not generate enough pasture, then we're going to import feed, and then the whole thing starts to go wrong in terms of costs and efficiency and all that. So we have to be realistic. From this analysis for over the last number of years, the top 50% of farmers are growing, in this analysis, right? So top 1,000 farmers, 500 of them or thereabouts, are growing less than 12.5 tonnes of pasture dry matter per hectare. All right. But if you want to achieve the 14 tonnes or thereabouts, it requires 10 grazings per paddock, right farm, capable farmer, capable farm, and suitable weather. We'll leave it at that, Chairperson. That's all right. Thank you.
Thanks, John. That was very comprehensive, and there's a lot of targets mentioned there, and a lot of things that we need to do. But if we can do them all, we can get back to that 15 tonne, hopefully. So I'll open the floor to questions for Fergal or for John. Are there any to start off with? Okay, there's one down here. And there's...
Hi, John Fergal. A brilliant presentation from both of you there, and very relevant over the last maybe 2 to 3 years, as we've all noticed grass growth dropping a bit. My question is, and it's probably relative to both of you, in terms of finding out what our individual farms can grow. Like Fergal, you're growing on a farm where you have achieved, 14, 15 tonne of grass, and it's getting back up to that from what you've done the last few years. Say on my farm, we've maximised probably just over 13 tonne on our best years. Is there a way where can I measure the nitrogen coming from the soil that would say, right, maybe I'm not getting what they're getting from Moorpark, and I am only capable of growing 13, or is there a way of saying, right, I can get this farm to 14? Is there some way we can assess that on the soil that we're farming on?
John, do you want to?
Yeah, you could answer this as well, Chairperson, but anyway, I'll make a stab at it. In a simple sense, no, there is no measurement, and we need to do that, right? Of soil, or nitrogen in the soil, right? Not directly, no. Like you can test for P, test for K, can't test for nitrogen, no, not at the moment. And now science moves on, and it would be good to do that. I suppose we ourselves need to do more on this. We've done some measurements in Moorpark and other sites. Moorpark's 185. We know other soils can do possibly 200. We know certainly if you take sandy, very sandy, light, dry soils, they won't go next to near this figure at all, right? They'll be lucky to be 100, 120, I think that's fair to say. So the only, I think you say 3 things to you, Aidan, isn't it? Yep, very quickly. The measurement piece which you're on, and you keep doing it to find out what that is over time, right? And I think Tom did a very good job this morning. And instead of focusing on the highest figure, we focus on what the realistic figure is. This comes back to our French friends who give us some insight, because they're very, very knowledgeable on soils. I think that's fair to say that in a good year, you put something away for the bad year in terms of forage, right? So the measurement is one piece. The next piece, and the Chairperson will give out to me if I don't mention it, which is soil fertility. The P, K, lime, and the sulphur have to be on the money all the time. And I suppose the last piece is that the farm will do a job in telling you, I know you'll measure it and all that, but it'll tell you what largely is capable of. if I remember correctly, from times gone by, you're Dungarvan, and I think it has the highest heat units in the country. So yes, it's another measurement of weather, but yes, it's early. Yes, it's warmer, but by doing so, it leaves you a little bit more exposed to, drier conditions, which people have mentioned this morning. So you get my point. Keep the soil fertility right, keep measuring, and the farm will tell you. How we establish the figure in Moore Park is we fence off these areas and see what they can grow, Deirdre, without without any inputs of slurry or nitrogen, and then that's how we do it over time. But while the figure's 185 in 24, it was more like 140, 150, which then helps you understand why the figures then are going to be lower in terms of pasture production.
Okay, another question here.
Yeah, I was just going to say that we're sort of about 35 inches of rainfall, I suppose, in the southwest, and we get through spring well, but as soon as we get to June, it's a tough time for us. So we sort of get out on a 30-day round right through the summer, which on a dry farm should we be trying to? Is this achievable for us? I guess. I mean, there's plenty of other things we can get right. I guess soils and lime and everything else, but are we ever going to be able to achieve what you're trying to achieve and get your 10 raisins per paddock?
Very simply, on a 32 rotation, no. And I know that's what you have to do. And I've been in your neck of the woods, and I've been on holidays in your neck of the woods, and it's a great place to go. And there's a reason I go on holidays there. So, because the weather is good. So I understand the rainfall is lower, and there are certain parts of this country in Ireland that will never grow 15 tonnes with the nitrogen allowances that we have now. I'm not sure of the nitrate regulation in the UK, but if the conditions are very dry, you're going to be compromised anyway. But it will be difficult. Not difficult. At 30-day rounds, you won't get the number of rotations in a simple way of answering it. At the same time, though, then you stock the farm appropriately, and you work with whatever level of pasture production you're capable of to meet the feed demand of the herd.
Yeah, over here.
Just a question about soil organic matter. It's not been mentioned at all. I just wondered if there's any potential opportunity in that with retention of nutrient, retention of water that's not been mentioned.
Yeah, it's a very fair comment. I should have mentioned, and I should have mentioned it to you, Aidan. The soil fertility is one piece. The soil organic matter is another piece, because there's a water piece to that, and there is a nitrogen piece to that, and that's very, very valid. So the cow, which you mentioned, which I should have probably mentioned, the organic matter piece there, is recycling, and that brings organic matter in. Slurry brings organic matter in. If the soil organic matter content is low, we are going to be compromised in terms of pasture production. We have been involved in a number of projects of converting tillage farms into grass production or pasture production, and the first sign of trouble, the organic matter content is limiting, and you're going to see a compromise in pasture growth rates. No argument about that. What we did learn from it, obviously bringing in the slurry, is going to help improve that, and that worked. And I think the other piece that we should not forget about our clover plant, it's very good at bringing organic matter into the system as well. That's fair to say.
And I'll just add a point as well. Through the years of research when I was managing the research farms, the clover has proven to, so there's 8 kilos of a difference in growth rate more on the clover systems for the months of May right through to September. And even during times of dry periods in Clonakilty, you'd see the clover plants keep growing, even though there was a lack of moisture, whereas the grass plants would shut down. So I think the clover is definitely adding, or would benefit on a dry, free draining soil, as it'll stay growing at higher soil temperatures.
Yep, okay. Paddy.
Paddy Kelly. It's a good thing I had one slide saying that there are certain situations of higher stocking rates can work, and I think Fergal, you articulated that lovely between the owned land, there's labour there, and I think most importantly meticulously managed, because you really got across how the attention to detail there, which is super. And so the question I have is, what percentage of your farm is in the high clover proportion, Fergal, that's growing most, and how much of your farm do you think you can get in that, or how much of your farm do you want to get into that category?
Yeah, so 55% of the farm has virtually no clover. There's 30% at the medium level, so averaging somewhere around 15-20%. And then there's another 15% of the farm that has high clover content. And I suppose that's been achieved through a mixture of, I guess, reseeding and oversowing. All the land is dry, free draining soil. There's probably one or two paddocks a bit wet that wouldn't be suitable for clover, but other than that, there should be clover on the whole farm. So my plan is to probably get back to 15 tonne of grass and probably spreading 160, 170 kilos of nitrogen.
Yeah. John mentioned that we definitely should be thinking of using clover. We said that if we want decent yields in the future. So, question actually to Fergal. There are many people almost have a mental block in terms of using clover, etc. widely. Fergal, go back to the days, would say, when you went to Clonakilty and you started using it. What was your thoughts in terms of what you had to do as farm manager? What was your feelings, etc.? And would you just run through a wee bit? Was the apprehension, was it justified? That's one question. And John, a second question for you, that slightly differently, in terms of areas that are likely to be dry, you often hear some of the old lads suggest that if you add the poor man's irrigation is to raise the K level. Have you any experience of people doing it and with what results?
I'll go first, John. I suppose initially in the farm in Clontre, I was being paid a wage, so I didn't mind what I was doing to the cows once they were fit and healthy, and what experiments I was doing in the farm. So, and I guess it was an exciting time. It was a fully reseeded farm. The infrastructure was all new. And I guess we were learning on the job at the time. So that's where we learned to definitely not damage the swards in spring, but follow the spring rotation planner. You need to graze off those. There might only be a cover of 400 or 500 on those lush clover paddocks, but you need to graze them off in February or whenever the opportunity arises to start stimulating growth. And then the bloat, that was a learning experience. I remember you came to the farm one day in Clon, and we were after bringing all the cows back in because they were bloating like so. But that was a learning experience, and I suppose that's the job of the people employed in these positions, is to do the trial work for everyone else here. But then I guess when we used to go back up to Moore Park and meeting all the researchers there, they'd obviously see the performance of the farm in Clon. They were saying, right, you're growing nearly 16 tonne of grass, and the cows are producing an extra 50 kilos of milk solids more than the cows not grazing clover sward. So then it kind of snowballed from there, and then more groups started to come to the farm to learn exactly what we were doing. But I guess we were only learning on the job as well, and I probably went through the lessons learned then about particularly it was around the bloat management. That was the one, I suppose, cautious thing I had in my mind, was that, right, I'm in charge of the animals, so I need to make this system work. So if something goes wrong with the animals, it's my problem. If something goes wrong with the grass, then that's the researcher's problem. So.
Was the apprehension, was it justified? Once you learn the simple techniques, just run through that. Some people need a bit of reassurance, I think.
Yeah.
Actually have a go.
It's important to understand the plant and how to manage the cows properly. If you don't understand it and don't understand how to manage bloat in particular, then it is a major issue. But if you understand it and about how to, I suppose, stop animals gorging themselves really on the bloat is the one thing. But as I mentioned in the slide, it's only 4 or 5 paddocks on my farm at home, and it's only probably for 3 or 4 rotations. And everyone involved in the farm at home understand what needs to happen, and it's just implemented now, and there's no issues at home with it.
So it's something you could relatively easily learn if you set out to do. It's a new skill, but once you learn those skills, it's not something to be feared, really. No, it's not something to be feared. And if we're being restricted in terms of how much chemical nitrogen that we can apply in future, then it's a no-brainer to have clover in your system when there's going to be extra kilograms of milk solids produced, potentially grow the same amount of grass at reduced nitrogen levels. So yeah,
now, after whatever 14 years experience with it, I can see a negative impact on the clover plant in the farming in my farming system. I suppose we've overcome the challenges as well as the overwinter growth. Whereas now I'm consistently growing 5 and 6 for the months of December and January, and that's due to how I changed the closing strategy on the farm, like grazing the high clover content paddocks last. So yeah.
Yeah, John?
Yeah, to come back to the question then on the K. Now that is a very good question, Michael. I suppose my first response is, to me, the jury's still out on it. So I know people call it the poor man's fertiliser. K is not exactly, any fertiliser is not cheap anymore. So I'll go through a few scenarios. Right. So have I seen it work? Yes, would be the answer, Mike, where K was applied and where lime wasn't an issue or the pH status was right. Would have given it a kick, most certainly would have paid for itself. I would say yes, right? In other scenarios where lime was, I just remember 2 scenarios in which lime was poor or the pH was wrong. I debated, Michael. Then I go to the other one, which is the enigma in the thing and which needs more work. If you put on K in the form of slurry, it most certainly did, yeah. But then you're introducing, nitrogen, you're introducing P as well. So, yeah, I think there's more work required in it. I think in certain scenarios, yes. If it gets very, very dry, I think it's debatable. We need to do some work on it here. I know other parts of the world have said yes to that question, that it has worked, but then if I think about that, that's in, down in the southern hemisphere, different soil type. You're dealing with volcanic soils, we're glacial, so there's differences there. Jury's out on Michael. Slurry, most certainly, yes. It's not going to cost an arm and a leg, so yes, I would probably have a go at it. Many farmers seem happy to do it. Yeah, I think that's reasonable, but I wouldn't have any scientific literature to say that it, in Ireland to say most definitely yes. But anyway, I suppose that's something we need to look at, unless the chairperson has any comment.
No, that's...
I think that's a reasonable assessment, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're running over time a little bit. We've had 2 really good presentations with an awful lot of food for thought. I'm going to ask John, put him on the spot. John, 2 immediate actions, or let's take, what's the call to action from this session? What are 2 things everybody here should do, implement in the next week, next month, or in the first rotation to get on that road to the 15 tonnes? 2 things.
Okay. I know we've had difficult weather last week, but the first thing we would measure the farm cover to see where you're at.
Yeah.
Right. And when you're on the farm cover, then you've walked the farm, you've learned a lot. It'll also identify where you should go. It'll also identify where you shouldn't go. It'll also identify where you should go on the wet days to keep going, right? Because paddock choice, grass cover choice, having the cow right, having the farmer right, they're all important to do on the wet days to keep going, right? Or things get difficult. So I'll give you 3. Do the farm cover. Have an idea where the grass is on the farm. Like you're trying to chase that 30% in the first, or 40% as in Fergal's case, with the spring rotation planner. I'm a little hesitant on the spring rotation planner because it's a date planner. For people here today who are good at putting information to pasture base, have, there are fabulous tools there available. The grass budget is a better tool than the spring rotation planner because it's not date based. It deals with what's on the farm, then you go measure again, it corrects you, you have a much better plan.
Yeah.
Right, so farm cover, your grazing plan, wet day, dry day, where you're going to go, and do the grass budget on pasture base.
Very good. Okay, so John and Fergal will be around after if anybody wants to come and talk to them. But I suppose just to summarise what we had in this session and how we can start getting back on track for 15 tonnes. John outlined the targets, the grazing targets. Fergal told us how he achieved them on his farm. Both speakers stress the importance of measuring. Measuring so you know what you can grow. Measuring so you know what you have. Measuring so you know what you can manage. Soil fertility, back to basics really with soil fertility, but the importance in so many facets of growing grass, getting our soil fertility up to where it needs to be. And then finally, clover, big important role, particularly in the current environment in terms of regulation, reduction in allowances. There's more nitrogen in our system. We can get it through clover, but really importantly, having our soil fertility right to get the nitrogen we can get out of that bank in our soil. So I'd like to thank our speakers, and I'd like to thank all of you for your questions and attention, thank our sponsors, and thank the conference organisers. So thanks very much, everybody.